Hey Village, thanks so much for tuning in to our midweek. For this episode, I'm joined by the one and only infamous Mikel Newman. So Mikel, thank you for sitting down with me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
I bet you didn't think that when you decided to follow Jesus, this is what it would cost, that you would have to sit with me on a Sunday after service.
This will be an easy one to do because this was a great message. It's a great passage. It's always been a powerful passage for me, so I appreciate how you dealt with it. I learned some things, always learning things.
Thank you. So when you, a part of your story is you and Karen were missionaries in Madagascar. Could you talk a bit about that? Because when we talk about the cost of following Jesus, I don't think many of us are called to Madagascar, so...
Well, it didn't happen all in one, explosive vision or anything. It was gradual little steps.
Yeah.
I came to Christ at university, and my family was never close. In fact, my parents were almost anti-family.
Yeah.
They didn't want us really to be associated with grandparents or aunts or uncles or any of that. So for me to leave home wasn't particularly difficult.
Yeah.
And I went to university. While there, I met my wife. Her family was very close, very large, very extended, and they included me into that in an amazing way.
Yeah.
And so that was good. And then I proposed to her in a Sunday morning message where there was an invitation. Is there someone here who would give their lives to go to the mission field? And I turned to Karen and said, would you like to go to the mission field with me? And that was assuming that between that moment and before we left, we would get married.
Yeah.
And she did, and we went.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so today, for our weekend sermon, I touched on Luke 14, starting from verse 25 to 35, where there really is a strong saying about hating our father and our mother, our brother and our sisters. And I gave a particular reading or interpretation of the text. From your understanding and your time in ministry, how have you approached that text?
With difficulty.
Yeah.
I was comforted to know I didn't have to hate my family, and I particularly like the way you said Jesus wants our family to be big enough to include others in our family.
Yeah.
And I think I saw a real life example of that in my wife's family, who included me.
Yeah.
I took that often as Jesus opened that monologue, if you will, with a bit of a slap in the face. That got everybody's attention. You what?
Yeah.
But I loved what you said, because I think any social structure, any social network that closes in on itself is not a good thing.
Yeah.
It may do some good things.
Right.
It may give support, comfort, but it tends toward isolation.
Yeah.
And we've seen plenty of that throughout the years. We lived in a society in Madagascar that was ancestral based.
Right.
People honored their ancestors. Some worshiped them. So it's very important who your family is, who your descendants are. The first question is not what is your name, but where are you from the point of view, what is your home area?
Yeah.
Then who are your parents? Not your birth parents, but those descendants before you.
Yeah.
And so, and in a sense, if you're a part of that, then we're real good friends. But if you're not a part of that, then there's a kind of distance there.
Yeah.
And so when churches started, they often started around family groups, which is a good thing.
Yes.
It gives stability initially, but if it can't broaden out to include other family and social structures, social networks, then we have a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and I didn't have time to touch on it in the message today, but in reading the passage, it's interesting that Jesus says, hate your wives and your children. And it's interesting that Jesus doesn't say hate your husbands and your children. Because, and it's such a small pivot, but from Pastor Paul's sermon last week, when he talks about how Jesus really died as a failure because he didn't have any children, wasn't married, didn't have any legacy, didn't have this traditional family to pass his legacy onto, but then he has us. So when we have this passage, Jesus isn't critiquing everybody. He's critiquing people who benefit from a particular social network or social structure. And so he's talking about the men who are privileged to have multiple wives, who therefore have multiple kids. But it's that system and that structure in the New Testament time that benefits men but disadvantages women. And so for me, when I read that passage and upon further study, I was like, yeah, God doesn't call me to hate my mother. He calls me to hate systems that would actually disadvantage my mother.
That's a really good point. In Malagasy language and in many languages, there's no real word that delineates husband and wife. The word in Malagasy is just spouse, and it's gender neutral.
Yeah.
So it's the same word both ways.
Yeah.
So that point would be lost there. They would say, hate. It would be it is translated.
Yeah.
Hate your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah, and that has a lot of problems in and of itself. So when, Michael, in our friendship, as I've joined the Village community, and as you've been a staple, you and Karen have been a staple of our Village family, you've offered me so much insight. And I'd love for you to share some of that insight with our Village family. What do you think it costs to follow Jesus today, here and now, in the 21st century, in this COVID pandemic?
Yeah, and I wish there was a quick and easy answer for that. I don't.
Well, we have a captive audience, so yeah, you let them know.
I think that's very personal, individual. I like the idea of as it were, hating any kind of a social network that closes us in, but being a part of a network that encompasses and reaches out. I think that's really important. What does that look like today? I'm not entirely sure. I like to think I keep up with things, but I don't. So I don't know what the things are that box people in.
Yeah.
People in many places where we've traveled, where I've talked to North Africans or Arabs, the Middle East, many Christians, people who come to Christ have already paid a price.
Yeah.
But when they think about taking a step, maybe leaving their home area, it is far more difficult for most of them than for most of us, because their family networks are so tight.
Yes.
3 generations live in the same household. Some of that's economic, but some of that's social.
Right.
And then you're 3 generations in the house, and then the next door house is the aunts and the uncles, and those 3 generations. So the whole community is fairly closely related. Yes. If you even, that's why some of the cities, I think, are so big. And I was musing on this while you were speaking. Yeah. We have these huge cities in some areas, and I think they're huge because people don't want to leave, so they just keep building out.
Right.
And so I think it is difficult. In the American scene, it's different.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I've totally adjusted to how different it is. You would have a better view of that than I would.
No, that's only because I wear skinny jeans. That's the only cultural difference. No, and that's so true. I think what I gathered from what you just shared there is we each have to count our own personal cost. We each have to identify that which keeps us from following Jesus and hearing his call. Michael, if you had one word then to give to our listeners, one word of encouragement, because it is difficult, it is complex, counting our cost and following Jesus today. What's that one word of encouragement?
I think just the focus on Jesus, it is easy. I'm a bit of a news junkie. I like to know what's going on in the world. But it can be a little overwhelming, right? But to focus on Jesus. Yes, there are these problems, but let's bring them to him.
Yes.
I'll try not to name 6 or 8 or 10 or 20 nations of the world that are just in disaster mode right now. You mentioned some. Scott mentioned some, but there are many others. But we hold up Jesus in our lives, and I think daily we pray for people we know in these places, or wherever we know people, other cities even in the United States, in our own disaster here. So I think just who is Jesus, and try to know him better every day as we read the Word, listen to people teach it to us, and then sit before him and listen to what Jesus wants to tell us. That's pretty simple, but I'm a simple guy.
No, but hard to do, and that does cost us something, but the fruit that yields is tenfold. So no, thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. Well, Village, that's our word for this week. Would we go and be a people of the Word? Would we go and be a people who lift up Christ, who lift up his name, and seek to bring others into this family? Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Michael, for sitting for this conversation, and we look forward to coming to you with some more episodes in the future. Thanks so much.